Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, my friends, whenever you are watching this video. Welcome back to another math time with me, Miss X. I am super excited to have you all here again. Let's begin by taking a look at our objectives. And remember, my friends, with our objectives, we are always looking at it in three parts. The first part is thinking about how we're going to do something. The next part is what it is that we need to understand. And then lastly, why we're doing it or why it's important. You may read with me or in your head as I read out loud to you. I will use chip model compensation or arrowway to solve subtraction problems that have zeros in the tens and ones place in order to practice different strategies that get us the same answer. Let's also go over our math vocabulary. Our first math vocabulary word is equation. Equation is another word for number sentence. You'll hear me using this word or this term a lot, so just know that when I say equation, I am just talking about or referring to a number sentence. Alrighty, next part of our math vocabulary is compensation. Now, compensation is a simplifying strategy where we add or subtract the same amount to or from both numbers to create an equivalent but easier problem. For example, 610 minus 290. That's the original equation. We compensated by adding 10 more to both numbers in order to get 620 minus 300 equals 320. They both equal 320.
All right, friends and families, welcome to the first part of our teacher model. Today we have the equation or number sentence 605 minus 498. You'll also see that we have a blank place value chart here that's labeled. That means we are going to be using our chip model. Now, as always, before we begin, we like to label our number sentence or our equation in order to figure out what it is exactly that we're solving for and what we have been given to work with. Let's begin and notice that we are working with subtraction. This is very important because in subtraction, we always begin with our whole followed by our part in order to find a missing part. That's why it's super important that we pay attention to the operation. Now, moving on to our blank place value chart here. Are we going to be drawing our whole or our parts? Well, since we're subtracting and we only have one part, we are going to be actually drawing out just our whole. In subtraction, this is true. We are only drawing out our whole when we subtract. So let's go ahead and begin. 100, 200, 300, 400, 500, 600, and looks like there's nothing in my tens. 601, 602, 603, 604, 605. Okay, now that we've completed drawing our whole on our blank place value chart, let's go ahead and take a look and see if we need to unbundle anything. We're going to do that by drawing a big magnifying glass, just like that. That'll help us keep track of the unbundling and the changes in our whole. Starting first with our ones. We have 5 ones from 605. Now we need to take away 8 ones, but do we have enough ones to take 8 ones away? No, we don't. So let's see if we can borrow from the tens. Oh no, there aren't any tens, but we do have hundreds. Should I borrow from the hundreds? Yes, we should. But here's the catch. This is really tricky. I don't want to draw 100 ones. That's just way too hard. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to borrow a 100 And so I'm going to cross that out because I'm moving into the tens. And I'm going to cross my 6 out. I'm going to reflect that with a 5 because there's only 5 hundredths now since we borrowed 100. I'm moving that into the tens place. And I know that there's 10 tens in 100. So I'm going to reflect that. Alrighty. Now, I don't have 0 tens anymore, so I also need to reflect that in our tens vertical model, in our tens place value on the vertical model. Whew. Okay, now we've borrowed tens. Oh, now we've borrowed hundreds to move it into the tens. Now we can borrow the tens. So let's go ahead and unbundle a 10 there, and we have to cross that out and reflect it with a 9 because we only have 9 tens now. We're moving these guys over to show 10 ones because 10 ones is the same thing as 110. Whew. Alrighty, so now I have 10 ones and 5 ones up here, so that's 15 ones. I also have to reflect that in my vertical model. Now let's go back. Can I subtract? Now, yes, I can. Let's begin with our ones place. So I have 15 ones and I can take away 8 ones. So let's do that. 5 and then 6, 7, 8. Great, super easy. And I notice that I have 7 ones left. 5, 6, 7. I'm going to write that down in the ones place. Moving over. I have 9 tens and I'm taking away 9 tens. Wow, that's so easy. That's pretty much all of it. So then that means I have 0 tens left. And moving on to my hundreds at last. I have 5 hundreds and I need to take away 4 hundreds. Boom. Oh, so I only have 100 left. Therefore, my missing part is 107. Welcome to the next part of the teacher model, my friends. So we are still working with the same equation. However, this time I'm going to show you a strategy that we've been practicing for the last few lessons, which is compensation. Now, compensation is pretty tricky, so we are going to practice this with subtraction today, and I will show you again how to do it. You'll remember that with our vertical form and the chip model, we had to unbundle twice in order to subtract. So with compensation, this is a much more efficient way to subtract. Let's begin our compensation strategy by starting with bars. Bars are what we use in order to practice compensation. And we will draw bars for both numbers that are given. Also, please remember to label whole part and part. And notice that we're doing subtraction. Alrighty, and now let's go ahead and label our next bar, which is 498. When we compensate, my friends, it's really important that we start it at the beginning at the same spot and that we leave space at the end if there is a difference so that we know we're solving for this difference right here, this blank space right here. Also, when we compensate, we are going to compensate on the left side so that we don't get confused, because we are doing the same thing to each bar, and it's important to see that each bar is experiencing change. Now, my friends, what would happen if I added 2 or compensated with 2 to each number? Yeah, each number would change. My new subtraction problem would be 607 minus 500. With this new subtraction problem, we don't have to unbundle. It's so much easier to solve. You'll be able to see pretty easily that 600s minus 500s is 100s. 0 tens minus 0 tens is 0 tens. And then 7 ones minus 0 ones is just 7 ones. We got the same part that we got in the previous problem where we used the vertical model and the chip model. So if 607 minus 500 is equal to 107, then that tells me 605 minus 498 should also be 107. Thus, 605 minus 498 is then equal to 607 minus 500 because they both equal 107. That, my friends, we call that the compensation strategy. My friends, I'm backing up a little bit because I want to explain to you a little bit more about compensation. For compensation, you can either add or subtract the same amount to both numbers, but the way that I like to think about it is how can we adjust or compensate so that the tens and the ones are able to be easily subtracted without unbundling. You'll notice that I added 2 because that would change it to 607 and that would change it to 500. You'll notice that I have enough ones to be subtracted. You'll also notice then that my tens place is the same, so it's super easy to subtract, and my hundreds place is enough to subtract whatever amount I need to subtract. That's really important when you're thinking about deciding during compensation whether you want to add or subtract. If my number were 600, so let's go ahead and redraw this. If my number were 600 and my other part still 498, it would be much easier for me to subtract by 1 for both numbers, to compensate by subtracting 1 from both. That would give me 599. That would give me 497. And you'll notice that I have enough ones to subtract, I have the same tens, and I have enough hundreds to subtract. That's a really important thing to think about when you're deciding whether you want to add or subtract in compensation strategy. All right, friends and families, welcome to the last part of our teacher model here. Our last strategy is adding to solve with the same number, sentence, or equation. Before we begin, let's go ahead and label. As always, when we subtract, we always begin with our whole followed by the part in order to determine or solve for the missing part. Now that we have established that, let's go ahead and fill it into our number bond so we are not confused. 605 is our whole, and then 498 is our given part. We are now solving for our missing part. Today, we are going to add to solve. So with this adding to solve strategy, I'm going to use the arrow way. It's just very helpful for me when I'm trying to add. You can also add it in the normal vertical form. However, that can be kind of tricky. So I'm going to do the arrow way today. 498 is my given part. And then I have 605 as my whole. I know that 498 is pretty close to 500, and I know I only need to do 2 jumps for that, so I'm going to go ahead and bring myself to 500, and then I'm going to jump 100 in order to get to 600. Great, then yay, I only have to jump 5 more to get to 605 from 600. There are a lot of different ways to jump. Do your best to minimize the amount of jumps you have to do so you don't have to add so many times. If you find it helpful, you can also jump by place value. So you'll notice that I am jumping by ones and also hundreds. You can also jump by tens if that's helpful for you. I find that that can be very helpful. In my strategy, I used the closest 100, which was only 2 more away, and then I was able to do a bigger jump. You can also use that strategy. That's something that we've learned a little while back. We call them benchmark numbers. Now let's go ahead and add the amount of jumps that we've jumped in order to find the missing part. 2 jumps plus 5 jumps is 7 jumps, plus 100 jumps is 107 jumps. Wow, so that means my missing part is 107. This is the same exact solution I got with the compensation strategy and the vertical model or chip model. It's really important to see all the different strategies that we've learned so far.
As you get ready to move into independent practice and your exit ticket, please keep these 2 things in mind. Number 1, read the instructions carefully. I cannot say that enough. Please do that on all pages all the time. Number 2, on page 243, read the instructions even more carefully. You will be asked to show different strategies for each problem. And then lastly, for the reminder, don't forget to work on pages 222, 223, and 243. It is linked in the description box below, so click that blue link, and don't worry about printing it if you don't have a printer. Just write down the problems on a separate piece of paper and solve it on your own the best that you can. Good luck, my friends. I'm looking forward to seeing your work, and I will see you all in my next lesson.